Today, we're going to be talking about planning your wedding day timeline. An incredibly important topic to obviously discuss, and super exciting and thrilling, because who doesn't love sitting down with a calendar and filling out how every minute of every day is going to go? Well, actually, you do.
I do.
You
I was
do.
That
actually
sounds
gets you very
actually
excited.
really exciting to me.
I prefer to just kind of like just show up.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's a good thing you have me.
Yeah, it is a good thing I have you. Yeah, that's true.
Keeps that balance.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. My complete chaos and your
complete order.
Yes.
And somewhere evens out in the middle.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Our daughter's in trouble.
Yeah, big trouble.
Yeah. You should see Saturdays when you're working weddings. It's
I have to imagine it's the opposite of my timeline happening on
it
weddings.
is the exact opposite. That is true. Actually, no, she's on a pretty good routine at this point. So
Yeah. All right. Sure. Keep telling yourself that.
Yeah, we just kind of just willy-nilly do it. Anyways,
back to the wedding timelines.
Yes, wedding day timelines. So, so we want to talk about some of the most important things to consider when you're building out your timeline. And who better than Samie, our co-founder and one of the owners of Something Perfect, the owner of Something Perfect, not one of the owners. Anyways, yeah. So first thing we'll talk about is the pre-ceremony timeline.
Yeah.
Actually, before we dive into that, before you start breaking down parts of the timeline, where do you recommend our couples start? Like if you're sitting down, you don't have a planner.
Okay.
Let's say if you do have a planner and then you don't. I'm curious on both.
Yeah.
Let's start with if you don't have a planner. Where do you start as a couple? I would think you would work backwards, but I don't know. What?
Well, you have a few like hard and fast times that you kind of fill in, right? Like you know what time your ceremony is going to be, which if you don't know what time your ceremony is going to be, you probably haven't gotten so far as building your timeline. And then you have to think about, sunset and restrictions at your venue and things like that. And I think we talked about that in another podcast. So definitely go back and listen to that. But you kind of have those hard and fast times. You have the time of your ceremony, you have your cocktail hour time, you have your reception time. You know what time your reception has to end because you maybe have a 4 or 5 hour reception, or maybe you have a venue that means that your music has to be done by 10. So you kind of have that end time already kind of set for you, and then you can work your way backwards.
Okay.
So, you got to think about everything that's got to happen before the ceremony and what your kind of drop dead time to be done is. And then, you have your kind of in between, which is like pictures and cocktail hour. And then your reception, you can kind of work your way and, there's different variations of how your reception can run. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure. But, that part, you kind of have a set time, like you have 4 hours or you have 5 hours or 3 hours or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to just figure out the best way to kind of put all the things that you have to do, although you don't really have to do anything anymore. But those big things that people kind of expect you to do at a wedding. And then, got to make time for dancing too.
Well, yeah, that's important. Let's be real. That's why we're there.
That's right. Not for the marriage itself, right?
Right. No, pretty much just the food and the dancing.
The dancing, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So if you don't, hypothetically, we don't have a planner.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we doing this? So we're working backwards. Great. We know where the milestones are along the day because we're kind of told that. How detailed are we getting? Are we doing this in a Word doc? Are we writing it on a notepad? Are we using Post-it notes? Like what are we doing?
Well, I think this is a great plug, right? Like even if you don't have a full service planner, you want to get a coordinator or day of coordinator or month of coordinator, or whatever people are calling that particular service that helps you with the end of the day, at the end of the planning, because event management,
sure.
It all kind of comes down to the same thing where that person's going to help you put together the timeline, and they probably have like a great process that they use that they can like replicate for your wedding. That's going to be really like spot on. So that's like the benefit obviously of hiring a professional, which you can obviously find on Bustld because we vet all of our vendors and they're all professionals. Shameless plug. But if that doesn't work for you, or maybe you have a smaller wedding and you really don't need a coordinator, you want your timeline to be as detailed as possible. And I know it seems crazy, and even if you live your life like Ryan, by the seat of your pants, this is not the time to do that, because you certainly don't want to get to the end of your reception and be like, oh man, I meant to cut the cake. Yeah. I totally forgot.
Or do a bouquet toss.
Or do the bouquet, you know, and I've like heard people talk about that before. Like the day just gets crazy and you don't want to forget something that was important to you.
Yeah.
So having like a schedule will at least, it doesn't have to be hard and fast, right? Like it's not like, oh my gosh, it's 8:02. If I don't, cut the cake right now, it's the end of the wedding. Like
Right.
this is terrible. My day will be ruined. But there needs to be like some kind of guidelines.
Right.
Because otherwise you're going to end up, forgetting things or running out of time to get on the dance floor. Or like a lot of couples will like go to each table and maybe they spend too long at every table. And so there's no one kind of moving them along. And then at that point you're like, well, I have 20 minutes left to dance.
Right.
And dancing was my major priority at my wedding.
Right.
And well, that stinks. That was not what I was looking for when I spent, all these months and money planning. So I think you want it to be as detailed as you possibly can, like down to the minute. Our timelines are typically 8 to 10 pages.
They're
So,
intense, but
yeah.
I mean, when I've assisted you, I've followed them along, and it's even for a chaotic person like myself, it's it's good because it kind of keeps you on task.
Yeah, and especially if you don't have a planner and you have presumably someone is kind of keeping you on track. So whoever that person is, you want to make sure that they know what you're thinking and what you're planning, because not everyone can, not everyone's been along the way planning every single second of your wedding. So that's the great part, obviously, about a coordinator is they'll get to know you and you guys can work on that timeline together. But if you're doing it yourself, whoever's going to be in charge on the day of, whether that's a bridesmaid or, a venue coordinator or photographers sometimes become de facto planners, but you want to make sure that there's like definite guidance. That way, like, hey, hair and makeup's got to be done. Like we got to push forward. We got to get dressed quickly because we're running a few minutes behind. That way your whole day doesn't like end up crazy, or I've heard stories of like ceremonies starting like an hour and a half late, and that's just and then your reception's pushed back and now you have all these extra charges and it's just chaos, and you don't want chaos on your wedding day. You want to be able to relax on your wedding day and be a guest
As much as you can. Yeah.
as much as you can, because it already is crazy in its own right.
Perfect. Well, then let's get back to the regularly scheduled, not Ryan going rogue program. So the first topic then that we'll focus on is pre-ceremony timeline. So how do you decide when your day starts?
Yeah. So you're going to, like we said, work your way backwards. So first things you got to think about is like how many people are getting ready. This really pertains more to the girls, right? Like the guys, you guys throw on your suit, socks, cufflinks, and you can do, maybe some gel in your hair.
Yeah.
You can do that probably in about 15 minutes.
Oh, no, I wake up like this.
Yeah, okay.
Shower, shave, and look for your suit.
That's right. So,
Pretty sure that's not the saying, but that's okay.
It's pretty much the same.
It's close enough.
So this really pertains to the girls. So, you have to think about how many people you have getting ready. So if you have, 5 bridesmaids who are all doing hair and makeup, you can assume that's 5 hours of getting ready time. So about 30 minutes per service is what you're going to estimate. Your stylist might be a little faster, a little slower. So that's something you can work out with your specific stylist. But a rough estimate is about 30 minutes per service. You also want to think about how many stylists you have. So that's an important thing to think through. If you have 5 bridesmaids who are each doing hair and makeup, that's 10 services, plus you, that's now 12 services. And if you think you're going to only have one stylist, then, you're looking at 6 to 6.5 hours of getting ready time.
Wow.
So, unless you want to start super, super early in the morning, it might make sense to add on another stylist. So that's something you want to think about probably before you book your stylist, especially some people have minimums related to, okay, every stylist has to have at least 5 services or something along those lines. So that's something you want to keep in mind. But that's going to be the biggest piece of kind of figuring out that pre-morning getting ready timeline. You also want to think about like where you're getting ready, like in comparison to your ceremony. So are you getting ready at your house, which is a 30-minute drive over to the ceremony? You got to account for that. And you got to add buffer time, right? What if there's an accident on the way there and traffic's backed up and it takes you an extra 15, 20 minutes to get there.
Right.
So you want to kind of add that buffer time. If it normally takes you 30 minutes, add 45 minutes. Plus you have to think about all the girls packing up their stuff, loading it into the car, waiting for an Uber, or if you have a bus. So you want to make sure that you allot yourself a lot of time and like a little buffer room in the morning, so that you're not running behind when it comes to ceremony time. And then also, what time do you have to be ready for your ceremony or like on site? So if you're at a church, sometimes churches have restrictions. That can be like, maybe your church requires that you get there an hour before the ceremony starts, or they want you tucked away 45 minutes.
Sure.
Either way, you want to be tucked away probably 30 minutes before your ceremony starts, unless you want all your guests to be arriving at the same time as you. Most people want it to be a little more of a surprise when they get there.
Right.
So those big kind of things that you have to kind of think about.
Yeah. So then, what do you need to fit in during all the kind of getting ready time? What other things should you consider besides hair and makeup?
Besides that, you need to think about if you want detail photos. So these are like the pictures that you see on Pinterest or on our Wedspiration boards. Shameless plug again.
Nice.
But those are the pictures that, you're probably not going to frame, but if you're going to have an album or just something to remember, like all these cool pieces you had. So that's going to be your rings, your invitation suite, your dress, those other kind of small jewelry, those kind of small details. So if you want pictures of those, you got to allot at least 20 to 30 minutes for that with your photographer. Now that can happen while your bridesmaids are getting dressed, but you want to keep that in mind and make sure you allot for that time before you have to leave for the ceremony.
Right.
And then also if you want pictures, like if you guys have cute robes or matching pajamas and you want pictures of those, you need to make sure that you allot time for that as well with your photographer. So you're going to have to build that into the timeline. Again, this is more time before you leave for the ceremony that you need to think about.
Right. I mean, and the guys have to have time to play Madden or FIFA or whatever it is, right?
Exactly.
Right. And have mimosas.
Exactly. And then also if you're doing any kind of pictures beforehand, so whether that's bride and bridesmaid, groom and groomsman, if you guys are doing a traditional first look, if you're doing a dad and daughter first look, another popular trend is a bride and bridesmaid first look. So, there's like a lot of these kind of, if you want pictures of you and your mom and your grandma beforehand, those are all things that you kind of need to think through. And that's all going to play in because everyone's got to be, hair and makeup has to be done.
Right.
Everyone has to be dressed. And whether you're going to do it, at your getting ready site or at the ceremony site, those are things you have to think through when building that timeline before the ceremony even starts. This is all stuff that's going to be taking place. So you can imagine wedding morning can be crazy.
And what about like the first look for like the groom and like the bride's side third cousin that no one really knows that well? Like I feel like that would be an exciting first look. It's kind of awkward and like
it's not happening yet, right?
I feel like we should put time in for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, we'll write that down.
We'll put a pin on that one.
Okay. All right. Well, I think it's a good idea, and we should
explore.
All right. Well, so, anyways,
this is why you're not in charge of the timelines.
There is no timeline.
That's right.
So then moving on. Now we've gotten ready. Everything's right on time. Everything's moving so smoothly. We're all fed. We're happy. We're dressed. No one's missing any belts.
That's a great point
or
though
socks.
about feeding. Make sure you eat lunch.
Yeah.
On that pre-ceremony timeline.
Yeah.
Don't forget to feed yourselves and those you love who are hanging out with you.
Yeah. I this is shocking to everyone. I forgot to feed myself.
What?
And you were sending food to me.
That sounds about right, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Actually, we're still doing that 8 years
Pretty
later.
much, exactly. Not much has changed.
No, it has not. All right, so next topic. As far as like the ceremony itself is concerned, how much time should you allow for the ceremony?
So it depends if you're in a house of worship or if you're getting married, in a non-religious ceremony.
Say a park.
Yeah. Or it could be a religious ceremony in a park or something like that. So typically, Catholic ceremonies are going to be your longest. They're going to be anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on your particular service. If you're doing a full mass, how many people you have. And then, your more, other religious ceremonies in a church are typically more like 30 to 40 minutes. Again, it depends on if you're doing readings, communion, other ceremonies, unity ceremonies, or things like that. If you're in a venue, typically you want a little bit of a shorter ceremony because you're not getting married in a church. So that might have been one of the reasons you picked not being married in a house of worship. So, I mean, for those, I would still kind of allot 30 minutes, but I would assume your ceremony is going to take closer to 15 to 20 minutes, depending on what you have in there, plus recessional and processional timing.
So that was my next question: is how long does the processional and recessional usually take?
It really depends on how many people you have, which makes sense.
And if they're
right?
huggers.
For the recessional, yeah. Yeah, how many of them are going to try to get your attention? The best thing to do is after...
I'd say 90% of them.
I would say probably more like 100.
Oh. Well,
but once you recess...
That cousin's already seen you the first look.
That's right.
You're right.
I would say once you recess, though, you're going to try to like kind of hide out somewhere. That way you don't have to hug everybody, and everyone can just kind of go on to cocktail hour and you can see them later. But for the processional, you really have to keep in mind like how many bridal party members you have. Are they all walking down the aisle, single file, or are they coming out together? How many parents do you have? How many grandparents do you have? With grandparents, are they walking a little slower? So those are things to keep in mind. I mean, the processional could take anywhere from probably, 3 minutes if it's just, a bridesmaid or two and the bride, to 7 to 10 minutes, depending on how many family members you're walking down. So that can add up, especially depending how long your ceremony is.
And has anyone ever done something similar to like coming out of the tunnel at Bank of America Stadium? Like Serper leading you out, smoke machine. I mean, that would add some extra time, I would think.
It would definitely add some extra time. It would also be very interesting.
Interesting. Okay. So interesting, guys, if you don't know, means we're going to put a pin in it.
Yeah, it does.
Fun fact. So after the ceremony ends, what do you need to consider before the reception starts?
So you're going to most likely do family pictures after the reception ends. Even if you've done immediate family pictures because you did a first look beforehand, you're still going to usually do your extended family pictures, your kind of formal photos after the ceremony, either on site where, you were kind of like in your venue space, or on the altar if you're at a house of worship, somewhere nearby, because you're going to have a big group that you have to move. But those can take a while, anywhere from 2 to 8 minutes per photo, depending on how many people. So if you're including, 30 or 40 people, it's going to take a while because you have to round all those people up, get them all together, get them all in place, get them to all look at the camera.
Right. To focus.
Yeah. So, those big family photos can really eat into your time, especially if you're planning to only, you're not doing a first look. And so now during your cocktail hour, you have to get in family photos, bridal party photos, and pictures with the two of you. You want to kind of keep that family list small, so that it's not eating into all of your time for your pictures of the two of you, which are going to be the ones you guys are going to end up framing on the wall, right? So you have to think about that as well. And then you also have to think about travel time. So if you are getting married somewhere not at the same place as your reception venue, and let's say it's a church and it's your family church and it's a 30-45 minute drive. Yes, your guests have to drive that, but also so do you. So you have to keep that in mind. It's not like you have an extra 30 or 45 minutes to take pictures. So that's something to keep in mind when you're putting together that timeline.
Sure. Okay. So moving on then, so we're looking at the reception timeline.
Yeah.
During the reception, what are the big moments that you should try to account for?
So after your cocktail hour is done, typically the first thing you're going to do is introductions. So there's certainly different variations of introductions, whether you're introducing parents and bridal party and the two of you, bridal party and the two of you, or even just the two of you. So there's all different kinds of variations. And shameless plug, I know we just put up an article on Bustld about it. So go check that out if you want to look at all those different variations. But definitely that's kind of the first thing. Typically from there, people go into their dances. So that's going to be their first dance, father-daughter, mother-son, traditionally.
Sure. Sweet Home Alabama.
Yeah. It's a great...
Yeah, it's a good intro.
A great intro song. So after those first dances, typically, there might be a welcome, maybe a blessing, and then dinner. Whatever different style dinner that might be. And then towards the end of dinner, usually you have your toasts, which traditionally is your best man, maid of honor, and father of the bride. I like to recommend that you keep it to like 2 to 3 toasts, maybe 4 max. If you open it up to a lot more toasts, that can take up a decent amount of your reception time, especially if you have a talker or maybe someone who's had a little too much to drink, and they get going.
Usually doesn't happen at weddings.
They get going and might talk a little too long. So that's something to keep in mind. You can even start toast towards the end of dinner, especially if you have like a buffet or stations.
Sure.
That way people, might still be finishing up, but some people are done, kind of keeps the momentum going.
Sure.
And then you cut the cake. And then you can either do your bouquet and garter right then if you're going to do it, although not everyone's doing that anymore.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I had a lot of fun with that, which would probably surprise some people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people don't do garter anymore. Maybe just bouquet. I mean, if you have a lot of single friends, it can certainly be fun. If you don't have a lot of single friends,
even if you don't, even if it's just Tuesday and you're hanging out at the house, I mean,
might want to throw your bouquet. Who knows?
You never know.
And then, or another option is to do that bouquet and garter kind of during dancing as well.
Okay. So what are some typical ways to organize those big moments? I guess you kind of touched on.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that's kind of the most popular way, at least in the South. Other options are after you do your intros to maybe do your toasts before dinner, and then have dinner and then cut the cake and use dances to kind of kick off dance floor. I think that works really nicely too, because everyone's around the dance floor already. So you already have kind of a captive audience that can just kind of push their way onto the dance floor after those first dances are done.
Yeah.
So that's a great way. More northern style is to kind of break it up in between, maybe have some dancing in between courses, have toasts in between courses. So, if you're having like a bigger style wedding, that can be a good option to kind of keep people's attention, especially if you have a coursed meal. That can be a good way.
Better have a good DJ if you're going to chop it up like that.
Yeah.
Keep that momentum. That's hard.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot harder.
Yeah.
You need a great DJ or a great brand. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what are some things to consider at the end of the night? Besides, I'm exhausted. I had to get up at 5 a.m. because we only had one stylist, and we had 17 people getting ready, and So
so you need to think about if you're doing a send off. If you are, then you have to account for time for that. So typically, that means your music's going to end a little early, maybe 10, 15 minutes. That way you have time to get everybody outside and get pictures of that before your photographer time is up. So I would say if it's send off, about 10 to 15 minutes is what you're going to be looking at, depending on your venue. If you have, a venue that's upstairs and everyone has to take elevators down, it could be more like 15 to 20 minutes to get everybody out. And then you have to account for breakdown at the end of the night. So that's something that a lot of couples don't think about, because they're like, great, I have my venue till 11, my party goes till 11. Sometimes that time that you have your venue to includes your breakdown. Like everyone has to be out by 11.
So pro tip, use paper plates and you can just throw it away.
Exactly. Everyone just run away.
Yeah.
So you got to account for at least an hour to an hour and a half of breakdown time.
Unless you have a planner.
Still, yeah. Still hour and a half of breakdown time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, cool. If you have a band and a stage and rental companies, the breakdown time could be even more.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Your vendors need time to break down and get out.
Oh, makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, perfect. So then, as always with these, so what can our couples take away? Obviously, timeline's not necessarily the most exciting, but it's so important because it literally is the structure of the day.
It is.
And if you're going to get what you want out of your day as a couple, what are some of those best next steps that our couples can take away?
I think, obviously a little biased here, starting to think about whether or not you're going to work with a coordinator, going on Bustld and starting to contact some of our vetted coordinators and asking what their process is for building timelines. That can help a lot and making that kind of decision on if you're going to hire someone. If not, working with your photographer or your venue to figure out like what are they willing to help you with as far as the timeline, and then working your way backwards, putting in, the times that are hard and fast, and then working everything else that you want to go in there into that timeline.
Perfect.